Good morning, everybody. Welcome to week 3, chapter 5. This is lecture 1 in week 3. And after today, we will have done half the lectures in the course. It's a very compressed time frame. I've been sending out some reminder messages to students who perhaps haven't engaged with the course for a few days. So if you get one of those, it's just a reminder that the course is very short and you haven't got a long time to do all the activities. We're starting week 3 today. Next week, of course, is week 4. In week 4, Digatati will be sending you the details of the final exam. So that we can't do that until we get official notification from the university, but that's going to happen next week. So you'll get notification of the final exam next week, and then of course week 5 is our last week of classes, and most of your assessments are due in week 5, except for the final exam, which will be very shortly after. So the course has only just begun, and we're already approaching the end of the course. So I'll just remind you to keep being engaged every day, and if you're a bit slow, if you haven't been online for a while, I will just send reminders out. The other thing I might try and do, if I have enough time, is record the last 2 lectures a day or 2 early so that you have access to those when you are doing your assessments in the final week. So we'll just see how that goes. See if there's enough time to do all that. If time permits, I will get those done a couple of days early for you. So today we're doing government intervention in the market system. So far, we've done. We started with comparative and absolute advantage and looked at why people may buy or sell. We then moved from there to supply in week 2 and in chapter 2, demand in chapter 3. And then the last lecture, we looked at the interplay between those forces of demand and supply to get to market equilibrium. And we also looked at the concept of consumer and producer surplus. So we're going to be developing that today. We're going to be developing it in this way, that we know that consumer surplus and producer surplus, or to put it in another way, the combined surplus, the combined benefit of the market is maximised when the market can bring itself to equilibrium. And anything that prevents the market from moving to that equilibrium, theoretically, it reduces the combined surplus. It reduces the combined efficiency of the market. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, and we will be doing exceptions to that rule when we look at things like monopoly, or when we look at things like externalities and public goods. So although in theory market equilibrium is always the point of optimum efficiency, Pareto efficiency as we call it, and the point of maximum surplus, there's a little bit more to the story, and we'll be developing that aspect of markets a bit later. But today, what we're looking at is government interference, and in particular, what we're looking at is the way that governments sometimes try to intervene in the market to either manipulate the price or manipulate the quantity of the good being exchanged. And although the government may have good intentions when they do it, sometimes the end result is not exactly as they planned, and they may think they're creating an advantage for one side of the market. They might be planning to help consumers or help producers. Sometimes, in reality, that goal isn't always achieved. So that's really the tone of the lecture today, and we'll do a few examples on the way through. I'm also going to do some equations today where I will model for you how to find equilibrium in the market, and then model for you how, when the government interferes with that price or quantity, how that impacts on the consumer and producer surplus. And we'll be doing those modeling that with actual numbers. So let's get into this now then. So we're looking at government interference in the market. So away we go. I'm going to transition now to our slide presentation. So where I'm going to start today is by looking at where we finished off the other day. What we saw the other day was that the market will adjust over time, so that demand and supply may shift. Supply may shift whenever demand shifts, to bring the price down to the long run equilibrium price. So eventually the market moves around to bring the price down to the long run equilibrium price. We saw that the other day, and I think I finished off looking at the curve when it looked like this, where we saw that over time the market may operate away from this equilibrium sometimes, and the firm can earn profit in the short run, right? They can earn profit in the short run. In the short run, this profit is possible, loss is possible, but if this was the case, here, then this eventually the market there would be more firms entering the market. I'm drawing that here. The price would eventually fall down to where I'm drawing the black line. It's not exactly right there, where I'm drawing the black line. And so this would be I would call this price our price long run. That's our long run price. In the long run, the diagram looks like the diagram I'm going to produce here, where the ultimate price delivers the firm to the point where the marginal cost equals the price. The marginal cost equals the price. This is the quantity the firm will arrive at in the long run, where I'm pointing here. It's not actually letting me mark that. I'll see if I'll have another go here. This is the long run equilibrium price. And at that point, you can see that the average total cost is equal to the price. And if the average total cost is equal to the price, then the firm is not making any economic profit. In other words, it's not making any profit above compensating itself for its opportunity cost. So the firm at this point, we call this point here, right? We call that point the point where the firm is making normal profit. Now, what we mean by normal profit is the firm is making an accounting profit. It is making an accounting profit, but that profit only compensates it for its opportunity costs. It doesn't give the firm any return above its opportunity costs. And so that is where the firm goes to in the long run. Now, why do we say that that is the most efficient point? We say that's the most efficient point because at that price that I've indicated, that is the lowest possible price that consumers could enjoy and still have businesses providing the product. If the price was any lower, no business would provide the product, and the firm would not get the consumers would not get any product. So that's the lowest possible price that the market can sustain and yet still supply the product. And so that is why we call perfect competition perfect. Okay, so the firm always returns to the minimum possible average total cost. In perfect competition, the firm delivers the minimum possible average total cost, and the firm earns just normal profit at that point. So why would we say then that in the long run, the long run elasticity of supply is elastic? Well, I'll insert a diagram and I'll just speak to you about this very briefly. I'm inserting a blank diagram here and I'm going to draw it from the ground up. So I want you to imagine this situation where here's the market over here, right? There's the market, here's the firm over here. So we've got the market, we've got the firm. I'm going to draw an average total cost curve going down like so. There's the average total cost. And here is my marginal cost curve coming up there, marginal cost. And at the moment, the situation in the market is this, that the market price is above the minimum price. So at the moment we have P1, if you like. At P1, that firm will produce where I'm marking the black dot, and the firm is making a profit because the firm is operating below the minimum average cost. You can see that I'm drawing in green. The average cost is below the point where the firm produces. What will happen now is new firms will enter the market. New firms will enter the market. The price will fall to P2. And this is the normal profit point. This is the normal profit point. So that's the long run equilibrium point. Now, what would happen then if the demand increased again? What would happen if the demand increased again so that the price went back up to P1? So now we've got a higher level of demand. A higher level of demand. What would happen? New firms would enter the market. New firms would enter the market because they're attracted by this profit. So at P1, firms are earning a profit. We can shade the profit in if we like. We didn't do it the first time, but we could shade it in. Those 4 green dots represent the profit. So other firms look at that and they say, oh, well, great, we have the opportunity for more profit. So new firms enter the market. So they're going to enter here. New firms have entered the market. new firms enter the market. So as new firms enter the market, the price falls back to P2 because now the equilibrium is where I'm making the blue dot. As new firms enter the market, the price falls back to P2 and the price again settles down to the long run price. So every time there's an increase in demand, there will also be an increase in supply from S1 to S2 to S3. So that's why we say the supply is elastic, because whenever demand increases, supply will also increase. And this is another reason why we would say that the market is perfect, because it means that more demand will be followed by more supply, which means the consumers always get what they want. So this is the long run supply curve. Because firms keep entering the market, and over time the supply keeps the price at the minimum level. So that's why we call it the long run supply curve. So back to the diagram I drew. All these supply curves that I'm underlining in red, they are the short run supply curve, but the long run supply curve is a horizontal curve because the market keeps returning to that level, and consumers can basically buy whatever they like as long as it's at that price, because firms will keep entering the market to provide it. So that's really a summary of the idea of perfect competition. Now, if we then think about this market, here is the consumer producer surplus in the market. We finished the other day by saying, yes, in the market, there's a demand curve. There's the demand curve shown by the individual reservation prices. Whoops. There's a mistake in the labeling there. This is the supply curve. This is the demand curve. All the individual reservation prices of all the consumers. Then we have all the reservation prices of all the producers. And the difference between the reservation price of the consumers and the actual price is their consumer surplus. And the difference between the reservation price and of the sellers and the actual price, that is the producer surplus. And every consumer gets a surplus all the way out to the equilibrium point, except the very last consumer. Every last producer gets a surplus all the way out to the equilibrium point, except the very last producer. And so the market that is allowed to go to the equilibrium is delivering the largest possible surplus. So that's where we finished the other day. And we saw that the surplus is maximized at the equilibrium, where I'm labeling now. So any other output will deliver less surplus. And that's where we come to government intervention in the market, because when governments intervene in the market, they, by the very nature of that intervention, they're going to move the market away from the equilibrium. So that's why we say that this infers a cost, right? This infers a cost, and that cost is the cost in lost output, lost consumption, lost surplus. So that's what we mean when we say the cost. It's the loss of output, the loss of consumption, the loss of overall surplus. So the first example that we're looking at today is the price ceiling. So the price ceiling. So the price ceiling represents a maximum allowable price imposed by the government. Now, why would the government do that? Why would the government elect to put a maximum price on products? Why would government do that? Well, the government will do that because it believes that the price is unfairly high, right? They believe the price is unfairly high and it's out of the reach of some consumers. So they say, well, look, in order to help the consumers, we need to bring the price down. That might be a good idea, but, it might be a good intention, but is it necessarily a good idea? So let's think about the market here before any interference by government. I'm just going to see what our next is. I'm going to draw the diagram for you. As we go, right? So I might superimpose on the present diagram, or I might just draw a fresh diagram. So let me just show you what this means. In the market, without any interference, this is the equilibrium price. Let's imagine that is the price of some product. It might be a staple product. It might be something like bread. It might be milk. It might be some meat product. And the government, for whatever reason, says this equilibrium price is too high and some consumers will not be able to buy that product. So we need to be able to help those consumers and bring the price down. So what would a price ceiling look like? A price ceiling would look like this. The government says that the price cannot be at PE. The price can now only be as high as PC. Now, C for price ceiling. So there's the price ceiling. And would it be legal to charge below the price ceiling? Yes, it might be legal to charge below the price ceiling where I'm putting the blue dot. But would it be legal to charge above the price ceiling where I'm putting the green dot? And the answer is no. That would be an illegal price. PC is the maximum price. It's the maximum price. And I want you to think about what this would mean then for consumers and producers in the market. Who would like the price at PC? Who in the market would like the price here? Well, I think demanders would like the price. So the quantity demand is going to move out here. The demand will move from the equilibrium down to where the price equals the demand curve. So QD will be demanded. Why will demanders like the low price? Well, when you're buying something, you always like low prices. So there will be more consumers who will have a reservation price at PC than there will be consumers who have a reservation price at PE. Who will dislike that price at PC? Well, the producers will hate it because it doesn't cover their marginal costs, or it covers the marginal cost of less products. It covers the marginal cost of less firms. So the quantity supplied is at QS. And what this means is that all the consumers in the middle, where I'm putting the red line, can no longer buy the product because they may want to buy QD. If we put numbers on this, imagine that 100 consumers want to buy the product, but only 40 consumers only 40 suppliers make the product, then there is a shortage there of 60. So this red interval creates a shortage in the market. So now think about what the government was trying to do and what they actually did. Before any intervention, the quantity was shown by where I've just dropped the green line there. We could call that 50 or about 50, say. But now that quantity is no longer at the green line. That quantity is now down here where I've circled the 40. So did they help the consumers or not? Well, they helped some consumers. I want you to think about which consumers would be happy with this concept. Which consumers would be happy with this concept? Well, let's drop it down. We'll draw a fresh diagram. Demand, supply, and we're no longer at PE. Now we're at PC. Here is the quantity supplied, QS. So I would say that all the consumers between the origin and out here at QS, these consumers that I'm showing in black are happy consumers because they are able to buy the product at PC. Good for them. All right, they are happy to buy the product at PC. On the other hand, who might be unhappy consumers? Well, there's two lots of unhappy consumers. First of all, remember our demand curve is out. I've just shown our demand curve. Our quantity demanded is at QD. These consumers are unhappy because they cannot buy at all, right? They are unable to buy any of the product. So the group in green, right? The group in green cannot buy. Why can they not buy? Because the products don't exist, right? The products don't exist. Only QS exists. So they cannot buy. There's a shortage. So those consumers are going to be unhappy, but some of them are going to be really unhappy, right? Some of them are going to be really unhappy because the old quantity equilibrium was where I'm showing in QE. And why will these group of consumers be really unhappy? Because they cannot buy, but before the government intervened, they could buy. They were able to buy QE before, but now they can no longer buy QE. So if I superimpose my numbers that I simply made up on the last diagram, 40 can buy, 100 want to buy, 60 people are no longer able to buy. But if the old equilibrium was, let's say, at 60, then these 20 consumers in it where I'm between consumer number 40 and consumer number 60 can't buy the product anymore, but they used to be able to buy the product. And so they are the ones that have really lost out. They are the ones that have really lost out because the market is no longer at the equilibrium. The market is operating where I'm drawing the vertical line because that equals the quantity supplied and only that number of goods are now exist in the market. So in this case, the market has lost 20 products. The market has lost 20 products. In reality, what's happened here is the economy has got smaller. Okay, so you can see it. You can see what's happening here. All right, you can see what's happening before us. What's being shown here is this. Before the intervention in the market, Area A was the consumer surplus. What was happening in the market before? Area C was the producer surplus. Now, after the price ceiling, what's going on here? Area A is now the area, whoops, I'll just have to fix that, forgive me. Area A is the new consumer surplus, and this has got a weird shape to it because you can see that I'm drawing a vertical line where the new quantity is. So, and everything above the price ceiling is the consumer surplus. And so the black perimeter shows the consumer surplus. In which sense is it bigger? Well, I want you to look at two parts of the diagram here. Look at the bit that I'm shading in red. Look at the bit that I'm shading in red. Why am I shading in that red? Because that has gone from producer surplus. That was in the producer surplus before. Look at it over here on the left-hand side. That was in the producer surplus, but now it's been transferred to consumer surplus. So we could say, well, in that sense, consumers are better off and producers are worse off. But we don't regard that, in economics, we would not regard that as being inefficient. We wouldn't regard that as inefficient because the surplus still exists. It just now is in the hands of someone else. That's the producer surplus has become the consumer surplus. Where economists have a problem with this is that that's not the only surplus that's been lost to the producer. I'm drawing a little green triangle here. That was also producer surplus. But where did that go? It didn't go to a consumer. It didn't go to anyone. That has just gone, right? That little producer surplus has just gone. And that's why we call this a dead weight loss. That's why we call this concept the dead weight loss. And it doesn't end there either, because we could move on to the little of looking for a different color here. I'll go blue. What about this little blue part of the consumer surplus? That is the consumer surplus. And where did that go? It's no longer part of the consumer surplus because they can no longer buy the product. And that is also gone. Right? So that plus that we call a dead weight loss. It's a dead weight loss because it's not a loss that's been transferred to someone else who has gained. It's simply lost to the market altogether. It's simply lost to the market altogether. And so that's why we say this is inefficient, because we've created a loss, but we haven't created a corresponding gain. We've created a loss, but not a corresponding gain. Okay, so on the next diagram, then we've shaded on the previous panel, but now we can see that we've created a little triangle in there that's called the dead weight loss. So we might define that a bit later in written on a written slide, but I just want to show you why it's a dead weight loss. At QE, we were able to make all of these goods, which means producers got to produce all these goods, and make a profit on them. Workers got to be employed making all these goods, so they gained salary, and consumers got to buy all these goods, so they gained consumer surplus. But now, when that price ceiling brings the production into queue, we still get a consumer surplus and producer surplus on those goods, but we don't get a producer surplus and consumer surplus on the goods that we no longer make. All right, I'm having a little bit of studio problems here. Let me just try and work this out for you. All right, I apologise for that. I'm not quite sure what's gone on there. I've lost the signal there for a minute, but I think I can go back to the presentation now. Okay, so what's a dead weight loss then? So a dead weight loss. A dead weight loss then is a loss in economic surplus due to the market being prevented from reaching the equilibrium price and quantity where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. So that's what we mean when we say dead weight loss. And we saw that in the previous diagram where the market no longer operates at the equilibrium, but it's now operating at a level below the equilibrium. So in the case of the ceiling price, we have a situation where who are the winners in the ceiling price? The winners, of course, are the consumers who are with a high reservation price, who are willing to pay a higher price than the ceiling price. So I'm going to transition out of the slides, and I'm going to talk to you for a little bit about what this means. So when we think about a ceiling price, we're bringing down the price of a product, maybe an essential product, and we're making it cheaper because we're worried about some consumers. We're worried about poor consumers. So let's think about a product like some meat product. In the old Soviet Union, before 1989, there was a heavy level of price control because in the Soviet Union, the government believed that all workers, all people should be able to consume essential products. So they would bring down things like the price of meat because they wanted to protect poor consumers. The thing about that action is that not all consumers are poor, but they're bringing down the price of the product for everybody. So it now creates a greater demand for the product. And yes, the poor could afford the product. The only problem is that, as we've seen on those previous diagrams, there's a shortage of the product, and not everyone can get the product because there's not enough of the product in existence anymore. The suppliers have stopped making the amount that they used to make because there's simply not enough money in it anymore. So they've created a shortage of the product. And then we have to ask the question, well, if they're trying to protect the poor consumers, are the poor consumers going to be the ones that are going to get the product? And the answer is probably not, because although the official price of the product is cheap, because there isn't enough of the product around, a black market will spring up where one lot of consumers may sell to another lot of consumers. And who's going to be the ones who end up buying the product? The ones who end up buying the product are the ones who can afford the product. There's a shortage of the product. There's an official price of the product, but the actual price in the society will not be the official price, because consumers will start trading this product between themselves at a higher price. And why will they be trading at a higher price? They'll be trading at a higher price because there is a shortage. So do the poor consumers get the product anyway? Probably not. What's the government actually achieved in the process? Just creating a shortage. If you wanted to look after the poor consumers, a better way than interfering in the price of the product would be to do this. Just give the lower income, your poorer consumers, if you like, some direct assistance. Pay them more in family allowance. Pay them more in unemployment benefits. Pay them more in a pension. If you want to help people to afford the basic goods, and you're worried about the poor consumers, well, target your assistance to the poor consumers. Don't target your assistance to everybody, because you simply make the good at a lower price, even though some consumers don't need it to be at a lower price. So it's not seen as an efficient way of protecting low-income consumers. A more efficient way than interfering in the market and interfering in the market quantity and price would be to just offer more direct assistance. And that's what this slide that I'm going to transition back to is about. All right, so now I'm going to try and then give you now an actual example of how this might happen. So I've got, first of all, we start with an equation for demand and an equation for supply. Now, some of you, of course, may already be doing this through Playconomics, but if you haven't, then we can start here. So I've got an equation that says this. The quantity demanded will be 36 minus 2p. Minus 2p. So what's this minus 2p mean? It means that as the price goes up, the quantity demanded will go down. As the price goes up, the quantity demanded will go down. So I'll just erase this for a minute and get you to think about this. At what price would this number be zero? Right? At what price would that number be zero? So I could say, well, let's imagine that the price was 18. What's 2 times 18? 36. What's 36 minus 36? That's going to be 0. All right, that's going to be 0. So that's important for me to know because I want to be able to draw the demand curve. So I'm going to come down here onto the next slide. I'm going to come down onto the next slide, and then I'm going to just keep in mind what that equation was. The quantity demanded equaled 36. Let's start with that bit. Well, if the quantity demanded equals 36, let's just put the quantity in here and call that 36. There it is. I've now got the quantity demanded on my demand curve. And I now want to know what this number is. Let's go back to what we decided before. When the quantity demanded is 0, the price is 18. So when the quantity demanded is 0, the price is 18. So now I have my demand curve. So what I've shown you there is how to visualize a demand curve from the equation. Let's go back to the equation again. We're now also told that the quantity supplied will equal the price. So what does that mean? The quantity supplied, I've got to finish this, quantity demanded equals 36 minus 2 times the price, right? And that's how we get to the price. That's how we get to the price. How are we going to get the quantity supplied will be equal to the price? What does that mean? What that means is if the price was 5, for example, then the quantity supplied would be 5. If the price was 10, for example, the quantity supplied would be 10. So all we're going to get is a line that looks like so. All right, now we've got a supply curve. So we've got our demand curve and we've got a supply curve. So that is how we move from an equation to a line. We can plot, of course we could plot the line, but that's another way of visualizing what these lines will be. So I then move beyond this point and I say, all right, if the quantity demanded, so let's come up the top here. We go to this slide. If I'm going to clean this slide up, and then we're going to work out how to get to the equilibrium. We're going to work out how to get to the equilibrium. Remember, at equilibrium, if I draw a demand curve and a supply curve, at equilibrium, what's happening to the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied? they are going to be equal. They are going to be equal. The quantity demanded and the quantity supplied will be equal at equilibrium, which means that this here, that is the quantity demanded, and this here, that is the quantity supplied, they will be equal. So I've just put that there, right? There's the quantity demanded. Here is the quantity supplied. I put that there. And then simply this is now a simultaneous equation. We move that over there and we've got the price will be now equal to 12. Right, we have 3p, 36, now equals 3p. So the price is now 12. And how do I know the quantity is 12? Well, simply I then put 12 in here. What's 2 times 12? 24. So 36 minus 24 equals quantity of 12. And if I put a 12 in here, then the quantity will be 12. So they are equal. So now I can check that I've done my calculation correctly. So then we move down onto the next diagram and we plot it. As we plotted before in our previous diagram, our quantity is 36. Our price is 18, so we simply come down. Here it is on a fresh diagram. Quantity is 36. Price is 18. Here's our supply curve. We've already worked out our equilibrium, and we've worked out our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity. So we've got our equilibrium, and we've now plotted it on a diagram. I know some of you will be able to do these sort of calculations much quicker, but when you're doing your final exam and if you have time and you're having a little bit of trouble thinking these things through, I would recommend drawing the diagram, having a little bit of paper and just plotting the diagram and visualizing what this market's going to look like. So we'll clean this up. We've got demand, we've got supply, we've labelled it, and we now know that this area that I'm shading in red is the consumer surplus. So how do we work out the area of a triangle? It's simply half the base times the height. How do we work out the area of producer surplus? Same thing. We have to calculate the area of the triangle to work out our consumer surplus and producer surplus. So we've done this on the diagram in front of us. We've done this on the diagram in front. And all that we've done is this. We've said if this number is 12, what is half of 12? Right, that's the base. And this is 6. So half of 12 times 6 is 36. So that number there becomes 36. And then on the producer surplus, we're doing, again, half of 12 and then times 12. And that becomes 72. That's 72. We add those together and we get a total surplus of 108. And that is our consumer surplus plus producer surplus in the free market. In other words, no government interference. All right, that is our consumer surplus and producer surplus in the free market. And what we want to do now is compare this situation to the government interfering in the free market. So we've labelled our consumer surplus and producer surplus. What if the government then introduces a price ceiling? So we've got the same diagram then, but what if the government introduces a price ceiling of 8? So we just insert our 8 in here. Right, there's our price ceiling. We draw it across there. And now at 8, our new output will be 8. This will be our quantity supplied, and our new output is at 8. And what's the first thing we notice? The first thing I notice is 4 goods have disappeared, right? 4 units, right? 4 units disappear. Right, 4 units disappear. They are not bought, they are not sold, they don't exist anymore. We've just lost those 4 units. We used to make 12, now we make 8. Once we've arrived at that, we think, all right, what's the new producer surplus? Well, here is the price. This is the price here. That's the price that the producer gets. We've got the supply curve. Right, I've circled the supply curve. So here's the marginal cost. That black triangle is now the new producer surplus. The new producer surplus. And I can see that there's 2 bits of the old producer surplus that they lost. I'm going to put an X in both of them. They lost this part and they lost this part. Right, they lost 2 parts of their producer surplus. So if we're producers in this situation, we are not impressed, right? We are not impressed. On the other hand, what about the consumers? Some consumers will be happy. 8 consumers will be happy. I'm marking them in. 8 consumers will be happy because they can buy those 8 goods for $8 instead of 12. And so what is our consumer surplus going to look like? It's going to look like this. I'm marking it in red. So there is our reservation price. We've got a consumer reservation price. I'll just write that again. Here is our reservation price. Right, reservation price. And we want to know what the reservation price will be when we get to good number 8. Right, when we get to good number 8. Because remember, 8 is our quantity that will be demanded. So we're going back to our equation. So what number would we need in here? The number we need in there is 14. So at good number 8, that's the reservation price at good number 8. Now the reason I need that number is because I need to be able to work out my whole consumer surplus. I need to be able to work out my whole consumer surplus. What will my whole consumer surplus be? It will be this shape. Down to the output at 8, then a vertical line down here. Why is this all consumer surplus? It's consumer surplus because it's the difference between the reservation price and the actual price. And the actual price is 8. So we've got a very weird shape now of consumer surplus. We've got a triangle and we've got a rectangle. We've got a triangle and a rectangle. And we can work out these 2 shapes now. What's the area of the triangle? It's half of 8, right? There's the 8. It's half of 8. And why is this number 4? This number is 4 because the difference between 14 and 18 is 4. So that's 16. And then what about this part? What about this part in here? What is that? Well, this is 4. and this is 8 along the horizontal. That's 8, so that's 48. So the total consumer surplus is now 64. The total consumer surplus is now 64. And what I want you to do is compare this to what it was before. What was it before? It was 36. It was 36, but now that's become 64. So that's a gain of 28, right? That's a gain of 28. So consumers are better off. Consumers are better off. Consumers are better off by 28. But then let's go and erase this for a minute and think about, well, what about the producer surplus? What about the producer surplus? The producer surplus used to be the 3 red dots that I'm making here, right? The producer surplus used to be those 3 red dots. But now the producer surplus is simply that black triangle. So instead of it's now half of 8, right? Half of 8, there it is there. Half of 8 times 8. So that area now is 32. But it was 72 in the previous one. If we go back to the diagram, it used to be 72. So this 36 became 64, and this 72 became 32, right? So we have plus 28, right? That's 64. That 64 became a plus 28 for consumers. So the 64 became plus 28 for consumers, but the 72 became a minus. The 32 became a minus for producers. So there is a net loss here. There is a net loss of 12. There's a net loss of 12 because the producers went down by 40, the consumers went up by 28, so there's a net loss of 12. Net loss 12. In other words, to make the consumers 28 units better off, the government made the producers 40 worse off. So, in fact, there's a dead weight loss. 12 has been lost and not been transferred anywhere. How are we going to calculate that 12? Well, we already did calculate it by looking at the gain to the consumers and then subtracting the cost to the producers. But we could calculate it in a different way. We could just calculate this area here. We could calculate that area there. And of course, what will that area be? That will be the area between 14 and 8. So that would be 6, right? That's 6, and along the bottom here, that's 8. So we work out the area of the triangle there, and that area will turn out to be 12. So, whoops. Not that this area, right? Half of 6, right? Half of 6, there's the half of 6. And then where's the 4 come from? The 4 is the lost production. So we've got half of 6 times 4. So this area becomes 12. So that's how we work out our net gain and net loss here. And if you just think about it like this, the producer surplus simply came back to C. The consumers have got A and B. B is the area of transferred surplus. B is the area of transferred surplus. But it's really the area in blue that we are concerned with. And that is just loss. That's lost surplus. And that's why we call this a dead weight loss. So our argument against that interference is that that under this situation, the loss is greater than the gain. Right? The loss is greater than the gain, and that leads to the dead weight loss. So I've gone through that quite slowly, but I hope that by going through it slowly, it's relatively clear for everybody. The opposite to a floor price is a ceiling. The opposite to a ceiling price is a floor price. I'm going to do this much faster. This is a minimum allowable price, and who does it? The government think it's protecting here? It doesn't think that the price is unfairly high. It now thinks that the price is unfairly low, and so it's trying to protect the producers. For example, governments do this in the European Union and in America, and sometimes even in Australia. They will do this to protect farmers who may be growing various crops, and they believe that the world price or the market price for the products is too low. So what does the government do? They have a demand and supply curve, and they say this price here, this price is too low. And so what we are going to do, we're going to bring the price up to this level, and we're going to call that the floor price. Why is it the floor price? Because if you drop something, it cannot go below the level of the floor. So the price can be above the floor price, but it cannot be below the floor price. Any price down here where I'm marking an X, that price would not be legal. So that's what a floor price means. So we'll draw the floor price in, PF, and I want you to think about what's going on here. The floor price has lifted the price of the product, and that means some consumers don't like this idea anymore, and or don't like the price anymore. So they move their demand for the product inward. They move the price of the product inward. And as a result, where I'm drawing my vertical line, that will be the quantity demanded now. Suppliers would like to make QS, but the problem with making QS is if they make QS, they can't sell these ones that I'm showing here in red because the demanders are only buying QD. So these would become a surplus. Farmers would have them left over. They wouldn't be able to sell them. If the price of the crop was, the government said the price of the product must be PF, and the consumers only buy QD, then the farmers would be making products which they couldn't sell, and that would be a loss-making exercise for them, and it would be a waste of resources. They'd simply wind up throwing stuff out. So in the same way, there is a transfer of surplus here. There's a transfer of surplus where I'm drawing the green rectangle. That goes from consumer surplus to producer surplus. So the farmers, if we're talking about a floor price for agricultural goods, that part would be useful to them, to the producer, not to the consumer. But this area that I'm highlighting in red, that becomes the dead weight loss. Why is it the dead weight loss? Because before the intervention, the output is at QE, and after the intervention, the output is at QO, which means that goods that I am highlighting on the left panel in black are now lost to the market. No one's consuming them, and in the end, the producers won't make them either because they know they can't sell the good. So the output has actually fallen to QO. So it's similar to the concept of the ceiling price, except that in this case, the government is trying to protect the producer rather than protect the consumer. But in the end, it results in a dead weight loss as well. So if you wanted to protect low-income producers, if you think the farmers perhaps are not making enough money and they're having trouble surviving, then what would be more efficient would be to make a direct payment, right? A direct payment rather than interfere in the prices. Again, perhaps a special allowance paid to people on the land who are in the farming industry. You give them a cash payment. What you don't do is interfere in the price because that just creates a larger inefficiency. And again, to try and help them, you may help them, but it's going to cost even more to other parts of the economy. All right, so we've done to this point two types of interference in the market. We've done two types, and we're going to do one more now. And this is in the area of tax. So unlike price ceiling and price floor, a tax is going to generate a tax revenue, and tax revenues can be good. They can be good because you can use those revenues, that income to government, to redistribute wealth in society, or you can provide opportunities to people like education, for example. So government tax is not always a bad thing, of course. But sometimes it can be an inefficiency in the economy. So let's look at this concept of tax. When we're talking about tax, this is not any type of tax. So when we are not talking about income tax, we are not talking about a profits tax on business. We're talking about an indirect tax where the government taxes an individual product. For example, I walk into my supermarket and I buy a product, and then I see that product has a 20% tax on the product. So we call that an indirect tax. The reason it's an indirect tax is because we're paying it from my pocket to the firm. But what does the firm do with that money that I've paid them in tax? They then pay that to the government. So I am paying it to government, but I'm paying it through the firm. So it's an indirect tax. I'm not sending money to the government directly. Now, if you think about the way that tax is collected, the tax is not going to the government is not looking to chase me for the tax. They're looking to chase the firm for the tax. Every time the firm sells a unit of the product, they have to send the government money. So the government is actually collecting money from the firm, even though the firm is then going to try and pass that tax on to me by lifting the price. So this is an indirect tax. So when we're talking about this type of government interference, that's the type of tax we're talking about. So when we get to the diagram, we're going to see that the tax is going to move the supply curve because it's the supplier who actually sends the tax onto the government. And of course, the government knows that the firm would be trying to pass the burden of that tax onto the consumer in higher prices. But when we're doing the market analysis, we shift the supply curve. So I'm going to transition back to our diagram now. All right, so we've got our diagram, and what we've got in our diagram, first of all, is a demand curve and a supply curve. And we've got an original equilibrium. We've got an original equilibrium at E. And then the government says, well, we need some income, and so we're going to get the suppliers to pay us a tax. How much will the tax be? How much will the tax be? Well, whatever the tax is, we can show it on our diagram because it adds to the marginal cost. It adds to the marginal cost. The firm has to pay its normal marginal cost, and then it has to add the tax. So it shifts the supply curve up by the level of the tax. Shifts the supply curve up by the level of the tax. So I'm going to imagine for a moment that the product at the moment is selling for $3. Right? The product is selling for $3. That's the equilibrium price. And then the government imposes a tax and it adds $1, right? It adds $1. So if I then add that $1 to my supply curve, I'm going to come up to the supply curve. I have a dot. I come across. If this is if it's $3 on the left, this amount is now $4. $3, that dot is $4. And what you can see is the new equilibrium price is not $4. The new equilibrium price is in somewhere in the middle, about $3.50, let's say. So the tax is $1, right? That is the tax, right? The tax is $1, but the price rise, you can see the price rise is less than $1. The price rise is less than $1. So the firm sends $1 off to government. The firm sends $1 off to government, and you can see that the new equilibrium price will just make a number up. Let's imagine that this new price is 3.5. It might not be 3.5, but I'm going to imagine that it's 3.5, and we've got a new equilibrium quantity, right? A new equilibrium quantity, Q1. And straight away, I can see that some goods have been lost to the market. Some goods have been lost to the market because this was the red was QE, and at Q1, we're selling less goods. Some goods are lost to the market, and think about what the firm is doing. The firm puts its price up from $3 to $3.50, but they have to get that $3.50 and then give $1 away to the government. So how much are they actually left with? Think about this blue dot that I'm making there. That's 3.5 minus the tax. That's 3.5 minus the tax. I'll see if I can write that a little bit neater. This dot here is 3.5 minus tax, which is 2.5. So is the firm happy? The firm will not be happy because originally the firm was charging 3 and now they are getting to keep 2.5, right? They're losing money. And are the consumers happy? The consumers are not happy because they were paying 3 and they are now paying 3.5. So consumers and producers are both unhappy with this arrangement because the price goes up for the consumer and the revenue goes down for the producer. The revenue goes down for the producer. So I'm going to then model this with some equations. I'm going to model this with some equations. So let's go down. I've left some blank slides for me to come back and do some drawing. But I think I've already got the drawings done for you in any case. So let's assume that first of all, we've got an equation for demand. And just remember how we did this. Remember how we did this before. We were told what the quantity was when we did the price ceiling, but here we're told what the price is. The price is 60, right? The price is 60. So we come down and we come to our diagram. What's the price? The price is 60. Now, what will this number be out here where I've drawn a little question mark? Well, if we then come back up to our equation, what would the quantity need to be, right? What would the quantity need to be if the price was 0? In other words, what would the quantity need to be when the price is down here at 0? What is this quantity that I'm circling? So the way that we would do that is to say, well, this 0.2 of the quantity demanded would have to be equal to 60. So that means that this number out here must be 300 because 0.2 of 300 is 60. So that's how we work out our intercept on the horizontal axis. So I know what my intercept is on the horizontal axis, and then we're then told that the price is equal to 0.2 of the quantity supplied. I've just realized this diagram is not completely accurate because this actually should be starting from the origin. In any case, we can still work with it. So we've got these two equations. I'm taking what's the price? That's the price of demand. What's the price of supply? The two rectangles show us that. Here is the price of demand on the left. Here's the price of supply here. We simply work out our simultaneous equation. We move this over here to change the sign. That becomes 4Q. That becomes 4Q. So now 60 equals 4Q. So 0.4 of Q. So Q becomes 150. And then we simply substitute the 150 in here. What's 0.2 of 150? 0.2 of 150, of course, is 30. So 60 minus 30 equals 30. So now we've we've got our diagram. Our quantity is 150 and our price is 30. What is our area of our triangle here? This distance here is 30. This distance here is 30. What's this distance along the bottom? It's 150. So we can work out our consumer surplus and producer surplus. I think we've worked it out there. We've worked our consumer surplus and producer surplus out. It's half of the 150 along the base. Quantity is along the base. Our height was 30, and both the rectangles were the same, and we've got a total surplus of 4,500. So that's how we worked out our equilibrium. We did two things. We worked out our equilibrium. We drew the diagram, and then worked out our consumer and producer surplus. Okay, now what's going to be the implication if we then impose a tax here? What is going to be the implication? The implication if we impose a tax is that we have to shift the supply curve up by the level of the tax. So I'm going to now imagine that we're going to impose a tax here of 10, right? We're imposing a tax of 10. And if we think about this $10, if we think about this, the tax of $10, if we impose a tax of 10, that $10, of course, will add to the price of supply. So we have to shift this supply curve up by $10, which is what we're doing. We're moving it up by $10. So that number there is $10. Terrible drawing again. That's our $10. It shifts it up by $10. And what does that mean with the supply curve? It means that the supply curve, instead of starting at 0, now starts at 10. So we just shift the supply curve up $10. So that's what's going to happen. And we're going to work out a new equilibrium. Our new equilibrium will no longer be at 150. It's going to be something less. It's going to become 125. We'll do that calculation in a minute. So we're going to be shifting our supply, our quantity produced in by 25. And then we have to work out what is the new consumer surplus. Our new consumer surplus will be certainly smaller than the old consumer surplus. What is the new producer surplus? What is the new producer surplus? And we also have to think about, well, what is this area in here, right? What is that red area? So that's where we're going next. So let's think about this. Our tax is being imposed. It shifts our supply curve up so that the supply curve now starts at 10. It doesn't start at 0 anymore. And we have to work out how much has our equilibrium changed. We know it was 150 and it was 30. But what is it now? So let's come down a few slides and work it out. Here is our new supply. Our new supply is changed by 10. So this is our total supply now. And here is our demand. Our demand did not change, right? Our demand curve did not change. But our supply curve changed. So we can see on the diagram, our demand curve did not change. Our demand curve stayed exactly where it was. Our demand curve stayed where it was, but it was the supply curve that shifted. So we come down and we work out that we move the 10 over this side, change the sign. We move the 0.2 over to the right, we change the sign, and then we wind up with 50 equals 0.4. So now the quantity is 125, and then we substitute this 125 back into the demand equation. So 0.2 of 125. What's 0.2 of 125? It's 25. So this is here is 25. And then 60 minus 25 equals 35. And we can come down and we show it on our diagram. So now we've got a new price, 35, instead of an old price of 30. And we've got a new quantity of 125. And we can work out our consumer surplus. So let's work out our consumer surplus here. Remember, our diagram started up here at 60. So what is this vertical here? That's 25. And what is the horizontal? 125. And if you think about this number that the producer is getting, what's the producer getting? 35 minus 10, so the producer is getting 25. So the vertical on the green rectangle is 25, and the vertical on the yellow rectangle is also 25, because that's 60 minus 35 is 25, and 0 up to 25, that's 25 as well. So we can work out now our new producer and consumer surplus. And so we've got before, what was our producer surplus and consumer surplus before? We already worked out what it was before, but now it's half of the quantity, but the quantity is no longer 150. The quantity is now 125, and the vertical is 25. So the consumer surplus is 1562, and the producer surplus is also 1562. So you can see that both of these groups have lost. They've lost about 700, right? 700, around 700 in consumer surplus. But then there's a third surplus now that did not exist before. And the surplus that exists now is the government surplus after the tax. In other words, this government surplus is their revenue from the tax. How much is their revenue going to be? Their revenue is going to be shown by the red rectangle. What's this rectangle? How wide is that rectangle? Well, the rectangle is 125 wide. And how deep is that rectangle? Well, the tax is $10. So it's 10 times 125. So there it is there, 10 times 125. And our total surplus is now 4350. So who are the winners and who are the losers from this? First of all, consumer surplus, down. Producer surplus, down. Who is the winner? Well, the government was 0 before, and now its surplus has gone up. But you can see that the gain in surplus is less than the loss in surplus. So the total surplus is lower. The total surplus is lower by 125. The total surplus is lower by 125. So what was the government really trying to do here? The government was trying to earn revenue, fair enough. And how much revenue did it earn? How much revenue did it earn? It earned 1,250. But the loss to the consumer surplus and the loss to the producer surplus is bigger than 1,250. And so there's actually a loss of surplus. And where does that loss of surplus really come from? It comes from the point because we've lost 25 goods. No one got to make them. No one got to work making them or get paid a salary. Firms didn't make a profit and consumers didn't get to buy them. So that is the area 125. And how can I work out the dead weight loss? I can work it out in two ways. I can simply circle the original surplus and circle the new surplus and subtract, and I get 125. Or I can work out the area of the triangle, and you can see the area of the triangle will be 125 because we've done the calculation as well. The area is half of 10. Where's the 10 come from? The tax, half of 10. And where's the 25 come from? The lower level of production. So the area of dead weight loss is 125. So I'm pretty confident that we've got all that right because it all seems to add up. So who's the winner of this tax? The winner is the government. And they may use the tax revenue to subsidise other things, provide public goods, roads, schools, etc. But of course, there are losers. So where we're going to finish today is understanding that, yes, we need tax. We need tax, and governments will impose taxes, and they will tax some goods. They will tax some goods. And so what they really have to think about is this. Which goods are they going to tax if they want to gain the most revenue? Because there's no point in imposing a tax unless the government gets some money. If they want to gain the most revenue and at the same time do the least damage. We saw in the numerical example that I just did that the loss to the consumer surplus and producer surplus was bigger than the government actually gained. And so there was a net dead weight loss in the economy. How can governments proceed in such a way that they make that dead weight loss as small as possible? So I want you to think about a couple of products. Think about a litre of ice cream and a litre of petrol. And the government wants to gain revenue and says, well, they both sell for roughly $2 a litre at the moment. And so let's put a tax on petrol and let's put a tax on ice cream. And I want you to think about which one of those is going to do least damage to the economy. Where does the damage come from? The damage comes from the fact that when the government taxes, people stop buying the goods. And if people stop buying the goods, two things happen. If they don't buy the goods, they don't pay the tax anyway. But if they stop buying the goods, that firm producing those goods will have to sack workers. Because if people are no longer buying the goods, they don't need workers to make the goods. So if people are going to stop buying the good when the government imposes the tax, that will create the dead weight loss because jobs will be lost, profits will be lost, and consumers won't buy the good anymore. On the other hand, if the government imposes a tax and people keep buying the goods, the consumers won't be happy because they're paying more. However, the industry continues to exist and pretty much exist at the same size, at the same level of employment as before. So if we compare ice cream and petrol, if government were to impose taxes on ice creams, big taxes on ice creams, we might assume that people a lot of people might not buy them anymore. If they don't buy them anymore, then the ice cream making firms have to sack some workers. That does damage to the economy. On the other hand, petrol is a different issue because it's far more an essential good. I'm not going to be able to move to my job or move around the city, move around in the way that I used to move if I don't buy the gas. So I'm likely to keep buying petrol. And as a result of that, a couple of things happen. One, as a consumer, I won't be happy because petrol is dearer. But two, I'll still be buying the petrol. And so the firm making the petrol gets to be the same size, employ the same number of people, etc. So governments think about this sort of stuff when they are deciding not just whether to impose a tax, but what to impose the tax on. So that's where we're going to finish in the last few minutes of the lecture today. Maybe I'll have time to get it all done. If I don't get it all done today, I will do it at the start of tomorrow's lecture. So here we have this concept here of the dead weight loss and what is the government going to tax? What's the government going to tax? Okay, so I've got two diagrams in front of us here, and the two diagrams are on the right-hand side. We've got a diagram where both the demand elasticity and supply elasticity are less than on the left. Let's just isolate the demand elasticity for the moment. I'm drawing on the left a flat line, and that indicates a much more elastic demand. On the right-hand side, I've got a much lower less elastic demand. So I'm going to draw a couple of diagrams for you to sort of just get you to quickly think about this concept. So on the we've got price and quantity, price, quantity. If I draw a diagram like so, if we draw a diagram very steep, what that indicates is that when the price changes from between the two black dots, the quantity changes again between the two black dots on the horizontal axis. But there's not much change in the quantity when the price changes between the two black dots. On the other hand, on the left-hand diagram, when the price changes between the same two black dots, you can see that on the right and left-hand side, P1 and P1 are the same, P2 are the same, but the change in the quantity, of course, from Q1 to Q2 it's Q1 and Q2, and here's Q1 and here's Q2 over on the right-hand side diagram. We can see that on the right-hand diagram the response is much bigger. So the right-hand diagram is far more elastic. So let's just try and isolate that idea. On the next diagram, I'm going to draw on the left-hand diagram quite a steep demand curve, and on the right-hand diagram quite a shallow demand curve. And then we're going to draw a supply curve, two supply curves. And what we're going to try and do is move both supply curves up by the same amount. So on the right-hand side, you can see that there's the supply curve. It's moving up to S2. And I'm going to try and move the curve on the left-hand side up by the same amount. So the vertical, I didn't do quite a good job there, quite the same job there. All right, now the vertical distance between the two supply curves is similar. So there's S2 on the left-hand diagram. And then look what happens to the change in price when we move the tax, when we put the tax on and we move the supply curve from S1 to S2. What happens to the change in price where the curve is inelastic? You can see that the change in price is much bigger. The change in price is much bigger on the left-hand side. When we change the price on the right-hand side, you can see that the change in price is much smaller change in price. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, the change in quantity is much smaller, and on the right-hand side, the change in quantity is much bigger. So where demand is more elastic, the change in the price is smaller. And so here we have where it's elastic, the change in the price is smaller, but the change in the quantity is larger. Where it's inelastic, the change in the quantity is smaller, the change in the price is larger. And I want you to think about who is paying the burden of the tax. On where demand is inelastic, most of this tax, remember the tax is the difference between the two curves, most of that tax is paid by the consumer, by the price rise, by the price going up from P1 to P2. Most of that tax is being paid by the producer. But on the left-hand side, you can see the vertical area of between the two curves is the tax, but not much of that tax is actually the change in price. So most of this tax is being paid by the supplier. Most of the tax on the right-hand side is being paid by the supplier. And then the last thing I want you to see is, where is the dead weight loss bigger? The dead weight loss is far bigger on the right-hand side. Why is it bigger? Because the change in the quantity is bigger. So if we are going to summarize these two things, right? If we're going to summarize these things, we say this, that where demand and supply for that matter, but I'm really just talking about demand here, where the market is more elastic, the quantity will move further from the equilibrium quantity to the new quantity. The quantity will move more, and the tax will create a larger dead weight loss. Where demand and supply are less elastic, the quantity moves less, and there is a lower dead weight loss. So if governments are choosing between taxing price elastic goods and price inelastic goods, they will generally tend to tax inelastic goods more. And they'll do that for two reasons. One, I'm circling, the dead weight loss is smaller. And there is another reason. The dead weight loss is smaller, but what's the other reason? Think about the right-hand side for a minute. If they tax a price elastic good, people move their consumption way into where we've circled at QT. And if people are not really buying the good much, they're not paying the tax much. So the government doesn't actually collect much money because people aren't buying the good. Whereas on the right-hand side, if they're taxing the least elastic goods, the government likes this because, first of all, a lot more people are buying the good. I've just made a red dot on the right-hand side. A lot more people are buying the good, therefore they're paying the tax. And also the dead weight loss is smaller. They do less damage to the economy. So if the government has a choice between taxing, the example I gave you before was ice cream and petrol, they will be taxing the petrol, not the ice cream. All right, so who are the losers and producers? The losers are going to be consumers and producers, and the winner, of course, is the government. We won't go to the next one. When thinking about who is I'll do the subsidy the next time around. I'm going to clean this diagram up, and I just want to make one more point about winners and losers, which is not shown on the slide there now that I have a closer look. I want to just think about who pays most of the tax under certain circumstances. If we look at the diagram where the demand is elastic, this price rise that I'm indicating is paid by the consumer. I'm putting a C there. That price rise is paid by the consumer. And of course, if the consumer is only paying a small part of the tax, then the producer is paying the larger part of the tax. So where demand is more elastic, consumers pay less and demanders pay more. On the diagram on the right, you can see the price rise is much bigger. So the consumers pay more of the tax and the producers pay less of the tax. So when we're contrasting price elastic goods and price inelastic goods, we think about the size of the dead weight loss. We think about the size of the government revenue. Let me draw the government revenue in. Much more revenue, price and elastic goods, much lower dead weight loss, and much less damage to producers. And that's why governments will tend to isolate price inelastic goods for indirect taxes. So that's the end of today's lecture. As again, it's a bit of a marathon getting through the 2 hours of lectures. However, we have got this topic pretty much done today. Tomorrow I might just start on a little bit that we didn't get to today, which is subsidies. What have we done today? We've done the general principle of government interference, and we did 3 specific examples: price ceiling, price floor, and indirect taxes. And on the way through, we looked at various issues around this to do with the distribution of consumer surplus and producer surplus, the implications for that, and also the part played by elasticity. Tomorrow, if we might finish this off by a little chat about subsidies. But substantially tomorrow's lecture is about the international economy. It's still about government interference, but it's more government interference in international trade. This is very topical at the moment because you can see from news coming out of America all the time, the Trump government is manipulating tariffs. And there's a lot of debate about how efficient that actually is. So we'll be doing that topic tomorrow. I think we have a good chance of finishing all our 10 topics in time for you to do your assessments in week 5, because I'm hoping to get through them in the regular lectures, but if I need to create some more lecture time, I will do it probably in the weekend prior to week 5, so that you've got all the lectures to look at, and that will help you with your assessments. So thanks for your attention today, and I will see you all tomorrow.